Amen. Again, good morning and welcome to Super Bowl Sunday. Anybody excited? It's Super Bowl Sunday, right? Wow, okay, wow, 5 people. It's electric in here. I see a few shirts and jerseys around. I had to go a little bit different. I didn't put on a football shirt. I put on a football shirt, if you know what I'm saying. A little bit different, but the Columbus Crew, because we are champions 2 of the past 4 years, and it's right here in our backyard. Yes, thank you, Gary. I'm excited for our crew as well. And in the NFL, I've not really known what championships feel like as a Cleveland Browns fan. So, you didn't have to laugh at that. But Super Bowl 58 is today, and tonight it is the San Francisco 49ers playing against the Kansas City Chiefs. And I do this every single year. All right, who here is rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs? Raise your hand if you're rooting for the Chiefs. Okay, there's a few people. All right, a few in here. All right, who is rooting for the San Francisco 49ers? There's Mark back there. I know he's a diehard Niners fan. A few hands are raised. Okay, all right. Now, who among us is hoping that Jesus comes back before the game plays and neither of those teams can win this game tonight? Okay, a lot more hands went up. And then lastly, who didn't even know it was Super Bowl Sunday when you watched it today? There's usually a lot of hands. Yep, okay. There are a lot more hands at first service that didn't even know the game was being played tonight, but that is okay. And we're glad that you're here. Typically on Super Bowl Sunday, I like to just have a little bit of fun, and I have some sort of message tied to a sport. So 2 years ago, we talked about coming up a yard short. What happens when we come up short in life, when we make mistakes, and we looked at the story of Samson. Last year, we talked about called the Hail Mary. No, we're not Catholic, but we talked about praying to God for a miracle. Talked about the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel. And today, I want to look at the concept of the underdog. The message today is called the underdog mentality. And so I don't know, if you're familiar with, what do you think about when you hear the word underdog? There's a few things from my childhood or the past few years. The first one is the cartoon Underdog. Did anyone watch Underdog? Never fear, Underdog is here type of thing, right? Scott was telling me that was one of his favorite cartoons as a kid. Maybe you think of, there was a movie that came out a few years ago called American Underdog, right? The story of Kurt Warner, who went from working in a grocery store to becoming a Super Bowl champion, a pretty incredible story. Maybe, and I'm curious, the real ones will know this last one, okay? This is 90s Christian music. Who is familiar with Audio Adrenaline, Underdog? I got some class, yes! First service, not a hand was raised. I was like, this group is not saved. We need to pray for them. You guys know what we're talking about. Okay. And if you haven't listened to it, I encourage you, as you're going home, you want some music to pump you up, listen to the first song, Mighty Good Leader, as you go home. It'll get you pumped up. So, anyway, some of the things that we think about when we think of the word underdog. And as a child, I think I had a wrong understanding of underdog, because when I saw things like the Audio Adrenaline album artwork, I was like, yeah, I want to be the underdog. I'd be out there like on recess, like, I'm the underdog. And they're like, yeah, that means you're going to lose. I'm like, wait, what? Like, it means you're not expected to win this game. And so a lot of times, I think we go through life with an underdog mentality. That I'm defeated, I can't win, I'm not expected to succeed in life. And that mentality does not come from God, right? That's not what God is speaking over us. So why do we have an underdog mentality? How can we go past that and believe what God has said about us? When you think about an underdog story and you think about the Bible, in my mind, there's really only one story. You can hear it on an announcer, right? Turning on a football game. We've got a great game here today. It's a real underdog story. It's a David versus Goliath type of story. Today we're going to look at the story of David and Goliath. It's one of the most epic battles in the Bible. And we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 17. If you got your Bible, you can turn there. If not, don't worry. We've got it on the screen for you. 1 Samuel chapter 17. We also have a Bible, an outline of the sermon if you want to follow along in your notes on the YouVersion Bible app or on the Church Center app. So let's start the story. 1 Samuel chapter 17, the first 4 verses. It starts here by saying this. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes-Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, And Israel stood on the mountain on the other side with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath. So here we're kind of setting up the story. It's the Philistines going against the Israelites. It's one of the greatest rivalries. You know, think about any sports rivalry, right? Fill in the blank. It's the Celtics-Lakers. It's Bears-Packers. It's Yankees-Red Sox. It's Steelers-Browns. I would say it's Ohio State-Michigan, but I don't really talk about that rivalry right now. I feel too defeated when I talk about that. So maybe next year. But this year, it's whatever rivalry you want to talk about, but it's times 100,000. Because this isn't just a friendly sports game. These two are going to war. They want to kill the other side. They want nothing left of that other side. And so this battle here is unique because it's not just one army facing another army. They actually would have one person go and step into the line of battle and fight for the entire army. It was a way if both sides agreed to it, that whoever won that battle, man-on-man action fighting, whoever won that battle, the other side would have to surrender and become slaves to the other. Kind of cut down on a lot of bloodshed, it made it a much more efficient battle typically. So both sides draw up for battle, one on one side of the mountain, one on the other, with this valley between them. And here from the Philistine camp comes Goliath. They say probably about 9 feet tall, very tall, and not just tall and like skinny, but tall and built. You know what I'm saying? Like a freak of nature. They say in the Bible that between his armor and his weapons, it probably weighed a combination of 150 to 200 pounds. We're talking about you were holding that, you were wielding that armor and that weapon to fight. And so no matter who you were, any normal man that would go up against Goliath would certainly be considered an underdog with little to no shot to win. And Goliath is standing in the valley, waiting for competition. No one is willing to go out and fight. And now you cut away from that moment, and you have David alone out and tending to the sheep, the flocks. He was the youngest of 8 sons, 8 brothers. And so while Goliath waited in the valley, David was called by his dad to go to the front line, go and check in on his brothers in the battle. Let's pick up the story there. Verse 20. It says, David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with the keeper and took the provisions and went, as Jesse, his dad, had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage. He ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. And as he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. But David goes out to meet his brothers, expects to see this battle taking place, but instead, all he sees is Goliath out there waiting for someone to fight him. And Goliath he's not just out there walking around, he is taunting. He is defying the Israelites and their God. And David heard how Goliath spoke against the Israelites and spoke against their God. And I love that simple sentence to end that passage. It says, and David heard him. That doesn't just mean that David heard it with his ears, his heart. Something changed inside of him. He was compelled to do something because of it. He heard the insults. He heard, really there was a level of shame associated with Israel. He couldn't stand by while shame was being put on his people and on his God. So he began to go around and saying, what will be done for the man who goes out and defeats Goliath? And as he said this, he probably felt pretty good about himself. Unfortunately, his brothers didn't feel that great about him. This is what his brother said. Verse 28, it says, Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep of the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. So Eliab thinks that he knows David, right? He thinks he knows why David is there and what he's asking for, why he's asking is someone going to go kill Goliath, but he was wrong. He underestimated David. And we're not exactly sure why, but maybe it was because Eliab was angry because David was the youngest, and he was asking questions and coming up, and maybe he was bothering him. Maybe it's because he thought David was full of pride. It says in here, he says he thought the evil of his heart. Can you imagine thinking a wrong thought about David right now? David is completely blameless in this situation. He's the one who's holy and righteous. It's everyone else that's struggling. Maybe it was simply that he felt intimidated that David was trying to push Eliab to go and fight this battle. Whatever it was, Eliab was assuming he knew David. He was assuming that he understood David's heart and motives. Sometimes we're labeled an underdog. We're not believed in because, number one, we're a dog of doubt. We're an underdog because we're struggling with doubt. You see, Eliab had sized up David and assumed the worst about him. Doesn't it hurt when people assume the worst thing about you? It's like, you don't even know me. Why are you assuming all these things? You haven't asked my side of the story. And it hurts even more when it's someone that's close to you. Right? This wasn't just some stranger. This wasn't a random person. This was David's own brother saying, you have an evil heart. Sometimes we struggle and believe that we can't win because we have believed the doubts of other people. It reminded me the message that my dad preached last week. Did that message bless you? Was that a powerful word, right? He said, not every thought that you think is your thoughts. What does that mean? It means that we receive thoughts from different sources. One of those sources is the thoughts and the words of other people. Right? Other people, they may say something to you, a harsh comment, and all of a sudden you've taken that and you've carried that. We had a great prayer time at the end of service. We were praying for people that maybe someone had said something into their life, or maybe the enemy just implanted a thought into your mind, and then you believed that it was your own thought, and the enemy would come back and condemn you, right? That's what my dad said. He said, I can't believe you're thinking that thought. Why would you think that? Well, you didn't think that. The enemy put it into your mind, and now you're entertaining that thought when you shouldn't be. But we were praying for people last week, and I wasn't asking people what was going on in life. I was not trying to pry into anyone's business. But as I walked from person to person, I just sensed a weight, a burden of that people, they had been carrying around something for years that God never meant them to carry. You've been carrying the doubts of what other people have said about you. Sometimes people say things that hurt you, and it damages you for a long time. You'll hear things like, you can't do that, right? You can't keep a job. You're not trying hard enough. You can't lose that weight. You're not trying hard enough. You can't get a date. You're not good enough. Your kids are not behaving because you're not good enough as a parent. These are harsh things. That I would imagine that sometimes you've thought something along those lines because someone said something that hurt you. We were not meant to carry the doubt that other people have put on us. And I believe last week God healed people and delivered people from that mindset. Amen? But it is always your choice to entertain that thought or to take it captive. And say, no, that's not what God says about me. That's not what he has spoken over me. And David's brothers doubted him. But they weren't the only one. News spread in the camp that someone was asking what will be done for the man who kills Goliath. And it reached Saul. All of a sudden, Saul is calling on David to come to him. And this is what David says to King Saul. Look at verse 32. He says, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against the Philistine, to fight with him. For you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. So King Saul, he doesn't tell David, you've got a small chance, maybe like 10% chance. He says, what does it say? You are not able. You don't have the power. There's no way you could possibly do this. A lot of times the reason that we're considered an underdog in situations of life is because we have listened to the doubts of other people telling us we can't win, that we can't succeed. Where would we be in life if we always listened to doubters? Where would we be in life if we listened to the doubts of other people instead of the voice of God? Anybody awake in here today?
Amen.
Doubt is what causes us to stay away, to not move into what God has called us to do. And I'm talking about taking risks, taking chances, making steps in our faith walk with God. And when I'm talking about those things, I'm talking about things God has called you to do, okay? Do not leave here and say, Matt told me to take a risk, to take a chance. I'm going to go into that bank and rob it and see what happens. That is not what I'm talking about, okay? I'm talking about things that clearly align with the will of God. If God gives you a green light in something, you should take that chance. You should start that business. You should write that book. You should ask them out. You should write that song. You should take the job offer. If God calls you to do it, don't allow doubt to hold you back. You're the one looking at yourself as an underdog when you listen to the doubts of others. And even though Saul didn't believe that David could kill Goliath, he still gave David permission to go. And he actually, we're not going to read the whole thing, but he gives him his own armor, right? This is the best armor. This is what you should take with you. David tries it on. It doesn't fit. He says, I can't fight a battle with weapons I've never fought with before. I'm going to take what I know I've used in the past, what I know God has used with my sling and my staff and the stones. And there's a whole message right there where we can take only what God puts in our hand and use it for battle. I'm not going to go there today, but there is a message there for it. But today we're going to keep going because David then puts on the armor that he's familiar with and he approaches Goliath. And let's read what happens next. Verse 41. It says, the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with a shield bearer in front of him. And where the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him. For he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog, that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. We have an underdog mentality because we're a dog of doubt, and because, number two, we're a dog of dread. We allow fear to seep into our life. We allow the doubts of other people, and then the fear, the dread that the enemy is imposing on you. We know for David, Goliath is obviously a very physical and real enemy before David, right? But I think for you and me today, Goliath is the spiritual enemy in our life. Think about the comparisons to Goliath and the devil. Goliath wanted to completely destroy the Israelites. He hated the Israelites. He hated God. He spoke curses over David. What does the enemy want to do in our life? Jesus said the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That's what Goliath wanted to do to David. But don't worry, Jesus said, I come that you would have life and you'd have it to the fullest. Goliath is a spiritual enemy that we go against all the time. It's that threat of fear. You see, Goliath was very good at trash talking. He was really good at imposing fear and trying to intimidate them. But a lot of times he was just walking back and forth. I don't think he actually wanted to fight. Because if the people of God actually knew that God was with them going into the battle, there would be no contest. And the devil wants you to stay behind the line of battle. Because he knows if you step into battle with God before you, he can't win. He wants to keep you behind the lines with fear, with the thoughts of, what if? What if this happens? What if I can't win? Doubt wants to keep you where you're at by believing that you can't succeed, and fear wants to keep you where you are by thinking, what would happen if I fail? Two different tactics to do the same thing. And if David had listened to his brother, if David had listened to Saul, if David had listened to Goliath, then Israel would have stayed stuck in a battle that God wanted them to win. You ever wonder what would have happened if David never came along, right? Would some soldier finally have just said, okay, well, I don't think I can win, but I'll go up there and do it, and then they would have lost because they never trusted in God and just stepped out into battle? Would Goliath and the Philistines finally just decide to attack the Israelites and a sneak attack them? I don't know what would have happened, but I think Goliath, and I think our enemy today, enjoys it more when we stay stuck in fear and we're stagnant. And we forget the fact that the God of angel armies goes before us. Goliath enjoyed filling the Philistines, or the Israelites, with dread. The enemy wants to fill you with the dread of, what if? What if the job doesn't work out? What if no one likes my work? What if they don't want to listen to me talk about God? What if the procedure fails me? Can I ask you some different what-if questions? Instead of asking those type of what-if questions, what if you said, what if your work, what if your opportunity becomes a success? What if the work that God is calling you to do, it impacts and it touches lives? What if because you stepped out in faith and talked about Jesus with someone's soul is changed? What if the procedure helps you get your life back? The enemy wants to keep you filled with fear, struggling to even imagine what it could be like on the other side of the battle line. David had looked around the camp, and he sees that no one wants to face Goliath. He takes up his weapons, and he steps up to Goliath. Goliath attempts to intimidate and scare David, but this is what David responds with. Verse 45. It says, then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the field of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. There's some faith in those statements right there, standing right in front of the giant. David had heard the doubts. He had felt the threat of fear. They knew they all considered him an underdog with no chance to win. But they were so focused on David. They were focused on his intent, or what they assumed about him, his pride, his stature, his weapons. They were only looking at his physical appearance. And they saw an underdog. But David knew that there was something greater, that we may be an underdog, a dog of doubt, and a dog of dread, but we're also a dog with a defender. And God believes in us, and he puts us in situations where we can fight and we can win when we remember that it is God who fights. Look at the language all throughout that verse. All of what David said, it was never about himself. It was never about what he could do, right? He said, he acknowledged that the Lord will deliver you into our hands. That the Lord is the one who saves. That the battle is the Lord's. David knew he had a defender. He wasn't relying on his own strength or his own skill. He was simply putting himself in a position for God to partner with him. God was simply looking for somebody who was willing to put their trust in God, and God would do the rest. And we call this an underdog story, but in reality, David never looked at himself as an underdog. If you watch the games, maybe there's an underdog story and someone wins in an upset, right? It's a Cinderella story, it's whatever. After the game, there might be someone who's interviewing them, and they'll say, what were you thinking going into the game? You weren't expected to win. They always ask amazing questions, right? It's like, what are you asking? But never have I ever heard anyone as an athlete say, yeah, we didn't really go into this game expecting to win. We were just hoping to play and have fun, have a good time out there. No, they said, no, we went into that locker room and we were expecting to win. When no one else believed in us, we believed in ourselves. That's the mentality we have to have. Not believing in ourselves, of course, but believing in God. Yeah, no one believed in us, but God called me to do this, so I'm going to stick it out and continue to be faithful to what He's called me to do. That's the mentality of a champion, not an underdog. David went in knowing that he was simply stepping into what God had called him to do. He wasn't going to have to fight the battle. He wasn't going to have to be the reason that victory took place. God is the reason that victory comes. You believe that? It is God who brings it. It's God who beats alcoholism. It's God who defeats cancer. It's God who breaks addictions. It's God who raises soul from death to life. It's God who overcomes the diagnosis that we hear. Come on, I'm preaching better than you're preaching back to me. It's true that God brings the victory. It's not me. It's not what I have to do. People ask me, how do you feel when you step up there? I was terrified, but I still do it. Because I know God's called me to bring this message and preach it to the best I can, and He's got to do the rest. God brings the victory. And it's interesting to me because God fights the battle. He works through David. But God wanted Goliath to be dead, but yet He waited for somebody to partner with him in order for it to happen, right? God didn't just choose to send lightning down from heaven and electrocute Goliath, right? He didn't just send fire from heaven to devour him, saying, there you go, Israelites, you keep going. He was waiting for someone to truly trust in Him enough to step forward. God was looking for a champion. And you might think, wait, I thought God's the champion. God is the champion. We sang that earlier today, right? You are my champion. Giants fall where you stand undefeated. God is the defending champion, okay? He will hold the belt for all of eternity. But He's also calling you to be a champion. Let me explain that real fast before we end today. And if you've not listened to anything, if your neighbor looks asleep, just nudge him and say, here's where it's going to get good, okay? Pay attention. There's actually 3 times here in this chapter that we see the word champion. The last time the word champion is used is actually when David is cutting off the head of Goliath the champion. But that word champion in our English is actually translated to a different word in the Hebrew than the other 2 times that we see it in this chapter. That last time, that 3rd time champion is said, it is defining a strong man, right? The victor, the strong man. But the other 2 times, it's a different Hebrew word. It's a word, actually, let me show it to you again before I define it. Look at 1 Samuel 17, verse 3. This is how we started this morning. It says, the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath. Okay, so the Philistines on the one side, Israelites on the other side, and they were drawing up battle lines, this valley in between. And it says Goliath came out of the Philistine camp, and he stepped over because he was a champion. In the Old Testament, that context, the definition of a champion was someone who stepped into the line of battle, between the line of battle, and was in that space to conquer whoever stepped against them. That's what a champion meant. And God is the undisputed defending champion for all eternity. But He's also calling you to step in between the lines of battle and go to war with Him against the enemy. Because God plus you is not the minority. God plus you is the majority. God plus you is changing things from impossible to possible. You can clap and praise God for that. God plus you changes the underdog to a champion. So don't look at God plus you as something that's less than, or not enough, or insufficient. God plus you changes the situation. And when you have an underdog mentality, you forget that God is going with you. But He's calling you to step up and be a champion. It's the same way that God called people to step up. He said it over and over in the Bible. You can look at stories. He calls you a champion before you've even done anything. Look at the story of Gideon. God says, you mighty man of valor. This is when Gideon is hiding in a well, basically. He is the least of his family. He's not done anything, and yet he becomes the champion who leads the Israelites into victory. God said to Joshua, be strong and courageous. He had nothing to be courageous about at that moment, but he went on to help them defeat the Canaanites and go into the promised land. Jesus said to Peter, he said, I'm going to build my church on the rock, and the gates of hell will not prevail. This was before Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. He calls us these things before we've even made a step. But now he's asking us, I've called you these things, so now step into the space. Step into the line of battle. And I wonder if the church is ready to quit believing the doubts and the fears that the enemy has put on us and start believing what God has said about us over and over again in the Bible. Because you don't have a physical giant, but you face giants every single day that seem too big and too impossible, but you have a defending champion, and you have a duty and a responsibility to step into the line of battle. I'm going to ask Brent and Audrey to come up as we get ready to close. Actually, why don't you stand to your feet as we get ready to close this time? I wonder if there's some champions in this room who are willing to step into the space of battle, and they're willing to worship God, they're willing to pray to God, they're willing to wait on the Lord. They're willing to pray and intercede for their loved ones who don't yet have a relationship with God. I wonder if there's some champions who will step into the space of battle and intercede for those who are struggling, and they're praying for a miracle of healing. They're praying for a miracle of restoring their family, restoring a marriage, restoring finances and provision. I wonder if there's some champions in here that need a reminder of what Romans 8:37 says about us. It says that we are more than conquerors through Christ. And as we close, I want to give you a chance to step up like a champion. Not going to take long, but I want to take a minute to pray for you before we close today. If you have been struggling with fear and doubt, it's been holding you back. Something has been said about you, and it's been a weight, and you've been doubting yourself. You've been fearing, what if this happens? What if that happens? I want to pray for you. But I also want to pray for those who are advocating and they're fighting for other people. They're stepping into this line of battle. We prayed for some people today that came up earlier, and they said, I'm standing in the gap for my family, for my friends. They're struggling with cancer. They're struggling with a problem. And you say, Matt, I've been doing that, but I'm going to rededicate myself to it. I'm going to step up and continue to pray and believe for those that are around me and be a champion like God has called me to be. So if any of that pertains to you, I'd love to take a minute to pray for you as the worship team, as they sing and they lead us in one more song.